In those days, the crest was in service to the shade, protectors of Heartvale. According to the steward, we are drawing close to Velt, which will mark the halfway point on our journey to Davennar. We will put in for supplies before continuing on to our destination. I am not alone in anticipating having solid ground beneath my feet once again, even if only for a few hours. Despite the excitement on our first day, we have seen only 2 other ships, a ship of the Heartvale Navy and an independent merchant. As befits bored mercenaries, several betting pools have been started, among them speculation on the welcome we'll receive in Davennar, the likelihood of encountering more pirates, and the potential development of an intimate relationship between young Ben Winestone and one of the shades who accompanies us. I stand to make a decent profit on that latter bet. These drift sailors know their business. I wish we had access to them when we made the journey to Heartvale. The merchant vessel we chartered out of Larsha certainly had more space, but the crew seemed to be barely able to keep the ship afloat. Perhaps it would benefit the crest to consider maritime training for as long as we remain by the sea. If need be, we could commandeer and operate our own ship. I will mention it to the captain when we return to Heartvale. In the meantime, all eyes are set toward Velt first, then Davennar beyond. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures. As always, I'm your game master and solo player, Steve Morrison. On this week's episode, the Crest make headway on their journey to Davennar, but they tread rough waters to get there. Find out what happens on episode 45, Storm Brewing. Last time, the members of the Crest and some Shade operatives set sail aboard the drift ship Undanya, heading towards the city-state of Davennar. Ben and Urdira spent a little bit of time having a heart-to-heart about growing up as nobility and being privileged. Ben decides to trust Urdira with his sister's writings, and she agrees to help him investigate and potentially take down this cabal of warhawks. Orchid is spending some time sharpening Bone Eater when they see a ship emerging from the mists on the seas. It's a pirate ship, and it closes in to attempt to ram the Undanya. A brief battle ensues where the drift sailors demonstrate their superior seamanship and are able to overcome the pirate ship, destroying it in a brutal ramming maneuver. They rescue the survivors, and though Steward Seta offers to allow them to remain on the Undanya and attempt to gain a new life as drift sailors, only a few take her up on her offer. They put the rest to shore once they're outside the ring of mountains that protect the Vale, and then continue on towards Velt. As the sea journey continues, I think we should just go ahead and ask the fate chart whether or not anything of interest happens on the rest of the journey to Velt. And Velt is this small village that is in between Heartvale and Davennar, and it serves as a landing point for ships making that journey back and forth because it is conveniently located for resupply. So does anything happen? Well, our chaos factor in the previous scene was 6. So let's use that. And I'm going to say it is 50-50. So does something interesting happen on the way? 50-50, chaos a rank of 6. 60 is our result, which is a yes. Yes, something interesting happens on the rest of the journey to Velt. So again, this is about a 2-week journey from Heartvale to Davennar. It's about a week from Heartvale to Velt. So the first day they encounter the pirates. I think the next couple days are a little quieter. Maybe it's even the day that they're going to arrive in Velt that they encounter something interesting. So let's go ahead and roll action subject to see what that interesting thing could be. 99, which is a doubles, but it's over our chaos factor, so it's not going to trigger a random event, is oppress and subject 60, oppress misfortune, or an oppression of misfortune. Well, the biggest misfortune I can think of on the sea is a storm. So I think they encounter a storm. And is there a scene there? I think, sure. If it's bad enough of a storm, it could end up capsizing the ship or sinking the ship and leaving our crest soldiers in a bit of a bind. So let's go ahead and use that as our scene setup, which is weather the storm outside of Velt. I'm going to roll my D10, and I think because they were pretty easily able to defeat the pirates in that previous scene, I'm going to take the chaos factor down from 6 to 5. So I'll roll my D10 and compare it against that 5. I've got an 8, which is above the chaos factor, so the scene is going to play out as expected. I think it is maybe close to dawn, and Ben emerges on deck, and he's looking around at the sailors and their activity around him, and they're scurrying around, moving. The oars are slapping against the water, and the ship feels like it's racing towards the shore. And Ben makes his way up onto the observation deck to look out, and he can see in the distance clouds forming, these thick, dark clouds that are closing in, and there's a curtain of rain that is falling onto the open sea, and it's approaching slowly but surely. I think as he sees this, he looks over at Steward Seta, who is guiding the ship towards shore, and he says, "Steward, are we going to make it in time?" And the steward has this grim expression on her face. She looks at him, I think takes in his appearance and appraises him in a moment. And she says, "You're a native Vailer, aren't you?" Ben nods and says, "I am. I did my service as did any other citizen." She looks back at the gathering clouds and she says, "Well, if you've done your service, what do you think? Do you think we're going to make it?" And Ben frowns and she nods and says, "Exactly. Maybe you should go tell your less sea-weathered friends that they should prepare for a rocky ride." Ben nods and says, "Very well." And he descends down the steps back to the main deck, and he is going to each of the small groups of crest soldiers and warning them. And there are a couple other Heartvale citizens who are a part of the crest in this group, and they sort of have seen these clouds and have taken stock of the situation as well. So they begin battening down the hatches and preparing for this storm. And They are watching as the storm is rolling in ever so quickly. Here's my first question for the fate chart. Is this storm a natural occurrence, or is there something more sinister happening here? Is this storm naturally occurring? I'm going to say that it is likely that it's just a natural storm. And our chaos rank is 5. So here we go. 61 on likely is a yes. So yes, it is a natural storm. Okay. So the ship is making their way towards the shore to try and weather in a cove or like find a spot that is a little bit more sheltered than just the open ocean. Do they make it in time? I think that is no way. I don't think there's any way they make it in time. This storm is coming on fast. 67 is a no. So they do not make it in time. They're getting close to the shore, but the clouds are beginning to rush forward. The rain has reached them now, and the deck is becoming slick with water, and Ben has joined the other drift sailors in trying to lash everything down and make sure that they are ready for this storm to hit. As the clouds darken above them and peals of thunder roll out through the air, lightning flashes, and Ben takes a breath and remembers the many times that he has been caught in storms like this on the ships that he served on during his time in the Navy. And he, for a moment, I think, feels this thrill of being back in an element that is familiar. And he is going to attempt to help them weather through this storm. And I think to do that, he is going to have to roll plus steady, as this is literally just face duress. It's pretty straightforward. 2d6 plus 3 for his steady. Now, before I roll that, let's go ahead and ask the other question, which is, can Arid affect the weather? I think he was able to unravel that bubble of dead calm that they were beset with when they faced the pirates. But I don't know that that means that he is necessarily weather focused in his powers. So let's ask the fate chart. Does he even have a chance to affect this? I'm going to say it's unlikely. Still a pretty good chance, 35%. I got a 4. That's an exceptional yes. So he is definitely able to. I think that means that maybe he has done some weather working in the past, and maybe on previous voyages with the Crest, he has been an element of the sort of like weather making. So I'm going to go ahead and have him roll a help, another PC move. And this is going to be plus arcane, which is plus 2. But because I got an exceptional yes, I'm going to give him a plus 1. And I think maybe that exceptional yes is that he has Lephalia present as well. And in fact, Steward Seta has a little bit of the talent as well. And probably her talent does relate to the weather. And so I think he has this like extra boon, and they're pouring their energy into trying to calm the weather around the Undanya just enough that the ship isn't cast aside and overthrown. So we're going to roll 2d6 plus 2 for Arid, plus 1 for the assistants. So it'll be plus 3 on this roll. 7 on the dice, plus 3 is a 10. So on a 10 plus, you get to give plus 1 to Ben, and then I can also give an additional plus 1 or not expose Arid to danger, cost, or retribution. Now I'm going to go with the additional plus 1. So this is going to be plus 5 for Ben because he's got a plus 3 steady, and he has +2 from Arid, Lephalia, and Stuart Setta's magical assistance. +5, 2d6. We've got 6 on the dice, +5 is an 11 on our face duress. So I am successful. You achieve what you set out to do. So first of all, I'm going to mark a point of advancement for Ben because he used his steady in this scene. And that is actually going to fill up his advancement track. So he goes up to 7 advancements. And then I'm going to go over to Arid and make sure to mark his advancement as well. And that fills his track. So he goes up to 3 advancements because he used Arcane, his first use of Arcane in this scene. And then we can go ahead and think about what this looks like, because the ship is now caught in the storm. And the Maricalaga is the sea of mists. And so I think not only are they facing off against thunder and lightning and waves that are crashing against the sides of the ship and over the ship and threatening to wash away those on deck, but also this thick fog descends upon them. And it's eerie. It's terrifying, really, because they can't see beyond the edge of the bow. Stuart Setta is well accustomed to guiding her ship through storms, and especially through storms on the Sea of Mists. She's headed towards the shore. She knows vaguely what direction she's headed, and maybe that's part of her skill, her talent. But they can't see where they're going. And so what Ben is doing is Ben is just basically going around and helping to lash down everything and, help with like putting away the sail, and maybe even descends down below deck and spends some time taking a turn on the oars as the ship casts over and back through the waves. As they fight the storm, it takes a few hours, and there are a few times where it seems grim and dangerous, but eventually they make it. Eventually they get to the other side of this storm. The mist begins to fade away, and the waves begin to lessen. The rain begins to let up as they make their way through the storm. And then as Ben is back up on deck, watching as things calm down, I think he is standing there. Iron Gull approaches and kind of like stumbles over to him. He says, "You look in your element, kid." Ben looks over at the sergeant, who is a little bit bedraggled and seemingly exhausted. And he smiles and he says, "I was born to the sea, Sergeant. There are times when I wonder if I wouldn't have been better off joining the drift after my naval service was up. I love it out here. There's a certain vastness to the sea that is overwhelming and breathtaking as well. Don't get me wrong, Sergeant. I enjoy being on land just as much as the next person. But I had forgotten how much I enjoyed it out here for these last few months that I've been on land." Ben looks back towards where the storm clouds are still the thickest. They can still see the flashes of lightning and the peals of thunder coming across the water to them. And he says, "I feel like the storm sometimes. All these doubts and confusions and hopes all raging inside of me. And yet, I have to be guarded and careful." Iron Gull, holding on to the railing of the ship, says, "Careful, Ben. Why?" Why do you feel like you have to be careful? Is it because we're just a bunch of mercenaries and you don't want to trust yourself with us? Ben shakes his head and says, "No, it's not that, Sergeant. It's not the crest, specifically. I've always felt like I had to be guarded. I grew up in a different family, Sergeant. A noble family. And I was expected to do great things, to be a leader of men. My parents spent a great deal of money teaching me about politics and about the way of the world. And then I went to war, and I saw the truth of the way of the world, that everyone is just trying to survive and make their way through this life. That our enemies were not some mindless beasts or people who were out to kill us, that they were just people defending their city just as we were defending ours. And from what? I watched friends and comrades bleed and die for Heartvale. And Heartvale goes on. It lives on, and they don't. Ben looks back towards where his pack is lashed to the deck and is wrapped up, and he thinks about the papers that are stowed away inside, and the words that his sister Ravia has spilled onto them. And he looks back at Iron Gull and he says, "Sergeant, I apologize. I shouldn't be speaking of this. That was before I joined the Crest. That life is over now." Iron Gull looks at him knowingly and says, "Let me tell you something about being a soldier of the Crest, Ben. I've been with the Crest for a long time. A lot longer than you've been alive. And anybody who says that they have left their past behind them when they joined this company, well, they're fooling themselves, Ben. We all have history. We all have pasts. And I can understand your need to guard against revealing too much. It's not my business, unless you want to make it my business. But whatever you've been told, don't let go of who you were. It's part of what made you who you are. And if you forget those things, you'll forget who you are and who you're becoming." Ben looks at the sergeant and says, "I didn't realize you were a philosopher, Sergeant." Iron Gull chuckles. "Any old soldier can be a philosopher. I've seen enough bloodshed and enough danger in the world to know that it's important for you to hold on to the things that are important in your life. You made an oath to the Crest, yes, to serve, but I don't think anyone expects you to just shut down everything you have ever hoped or thought or believed. Maybe there will come a time where you'll have to make a choice between the Crest and doing something that would benefit your family or friends or something from your past life. But it doesn't always have to be that way. You know, you should really talk to Orchid about this. I think they would have a good perspective for you." Ben looks at the sergeant and then looks back out over the water. And he says, "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate these words of encouragement. And I want you to know that I am 100% devoted to the Crest. I made my choice. I swore the oath. And I mean to keep it. There have just been some things that have come to light recently that make me wonder if I could do more good for Hartvale than I originally thought. Iron Gull takes a step closer and lays a heavy, meaty hand on Ben's shoulder and says, like I said, kid, nobody said that you couldn't do both. Serving the crest could help Hartvale. I think the captain means to make Hartvale home for a little while at least. So we might as well do some good while we can. And make a little coin as well. Ben chuckles and says, always, Sergeant. Iron Gull nods and says, all right, it seems like it has calmed down a little bit out here. I'm going to go find a place to settle in for the rest of this journey to Velt. I don't particularly like being out on the open water, unlike you. This is not my element. Ben smiles and says, don't worry, Sergeant. I'll keep a weather eye out. Master Sergeant Iron Gull shakes his head and turns and heads back down below deck. Ben looks out over the open ocean as the storm clouds begin to fade into the distance, and he thinks about this conversation that he has had with Iron Gull. And I think that's where we are going to end this scene. So that was the interesting thing that happened on the way to Velt. And I think we can now officially say that the Undania has arrived at Velt. So again, Velt is this small little village, and they're going to resupply there. Let's go ahead and ask the fate chart if there is anything interesting that happens in Velt as they're making this journey. We're going to keep the same chaos factor of 5 for this question. And I want to say that it is somewhat likely that something interesting happens there, because we've talked a lot about the Shade and Hartvale and Shade operatives and Kingsword operatives coming and going and heading to Davennar and doing all this stuff. But Davennar also has spies and agents that they send out. And it's possible that there is a Davennaran agent who is in Velt, who is on the lookout for strange comings and goings. And I can tell you that a drift ship with Crest mercenaries landing and maybe letting slip that they're headed towards Davennar would be a thing of interest. So I think that's going to make it either somewhat likely or likely that something interesting could happen. So let's go with, I feel like somewhat likely. Because I don't think that the Crest are just going to be brazenly talking about where they're going. So let's say somewhat likely, chaos rank of 5. 18 is a yes. So something interesting happens here. Is it that there is a Davennaran agent here? I think that will probably be 50-50. 71 is a no. So it's not a Davennaran agent. Okay. Is it a Shade? Is there a Shade contact who is in Velt? Again, I'm going to say that's 50-50. 100 is an exceptional no. So the Shade basically don't even leave the ship. So they arrive in Velt, but the Shade occult infiltrators remain on the ship. And I think unlike, this is a little divergence, but unlike Erdira, who is just kind of like a standard Shade. So she's a spy, she does some thieving, maybe some assassination now and again, but I don't know that that's necessarily in her wheelhouse. But she's definitely a spy and like someone that can infiltrate a community or a group. I mean, that's why she was working at the Vixilio War College. Unlike Erdira, these occult infiltrators are really scary people. And I think that they have runes or like arcane markings etched on their skin. And maybe they even like wear hoods or veils over their face. and they keep to themselves. They're very quiet. I feel like only one of them communicates with the steward and maybe Erdira and maybe the lieutenant or Sergeant Irongull, but there's not intermingling that's going on between the Shade and the Crest, because these occult infiltrators are here to do one thing. They're here to find these cultists, get past whatever wards and dangerous things that are protecting these cultists, and eliminate them. So the Shade have no presence whatsoever in Velt. And in fact, these occult infiltrators are a little off-putting even to the Crest. So going back to what's the interesting thing that happens in Velt, I think the last question that I'm going to ask the fate chart is there a Kingsword operative here that they could get information from? And if that comes up as a no, I'm just going to roll on action and subject and see what that prompts in my mind. So is there a Kingsword operative? I think it's more likely that there's a Kingsword operative than the others. So I'm going to say it's somewhat likely. 98 is another exceptional no. So there are no Shade operatives. There are no Davennaran operatives. There are no Kingsword operatives here in Velt, which, now that I'm thinking about it, is kind of weird. Because this is a place that is in between those two cities, isn't it a little strange that the three sort of like most prominent information gathering organizations don't have a presence here in Velt? I think it's weird. Does that mean that there is some other presence here in Velt that is suppressing those things? I think that is likely. So we're going to roll on this once again. 23 is a yes. There is some other presence here that is suppressing these other operatives. When they arrive at Velt, is it normal? Is it business as usual? Or has Velt been overrun by something? Has Velt been overrun by pirates and basically turned into a pirate haven? I think it's unlikely because it's such an important port between these two merchant city-states. 80 is a no, so it has not become a pirate haven. So what could it be then? Maybe now is the time to roll on action and subject to see if that gives us an idea of what this is. 95, punish, and 45, illness. Punish illness. Or a punishment of illness. Okay, well, I guess that is pretty clear then. There is some sort of sickness that has befallen Velt. So as the Andanya is making its way towards Velt, the storm now far in the distance, it's mid-afternoon, and they are approaching the cove where this port is located. I think Steward Seta, looking out, she sees that there is a Heartvale warship and a Davennaran warship moored outside of the harbor. And I think she grows a little concerned because it's rare to see a Heartvale and a Davennaran ship in like sort of close proximity like that, without there being the potential for conflict to spark off at any moment. And Ben is watching this as well as they're drawing close, and he just says to Arid and Orchid and Erdira, says, "That can't be good. It's unusual to see and can only mean trouble for us." So as they're drawing closer, I think they get hailed by the Heartvale ship, and the Heartvale naval captain calls out and informs them that the village of Velt is under quarantine as there is an illness that is raging through the village, and that they are keeping ships from coming and going within the village. So here's the question, because they were going to put in at Velt to get supplies. Are they so low on supplies that they're not going to make it to Davennar? I think that is somewhat likely. 20 is a yes. So they're not going to make it all the way to Davennar with the supplies that they brought with them. Does the Heartvale naval ship have supplies that they can trade? I think that's basically impossible, because I think the Heartvale naval captain, and for that matter, the Davennaran naval captain, are conserving their rations because they don't know how long they're going to be here waiting on reinforcements and resupply to keep this quarantine in effect. So I'm going to say it's impossible. 100, which is an exceptional no. So they definitely do not have any supplies. And I'm going to say in so much as no other ship in this area has any supplies that they can provide. So with that being said, I think what has to happen is they have to continue on and forage and hunt and resupply that way, as opposed to resupplying in this very convenient town. So let's go ahead and set up our scene for that. And I think the chaos factor is definitely going back up to 6. And I'm going to say forage for supplies is going to be the next scene. We'll roll our D10 and see what happens. 5, which is below the chaos factor and an odd number, so this is going to be an altered scene. So it's the next logical scene idea. So forage for supplies means landing and foraging around. Is there another small village close to Velt that they could try to put in at to get supplies? I think it is unlikely. 63 is a no. Okay, so there's no other village that they could put in at to get supplies. So what would be the altered scene here? I mean, they could come across a ship and try to bargain or barter for supplies. That might be the next logical thing. So do they come across a ship that they might be able to barter for supplies from? I think that is unlikely. 44 is a yes. And it is a random event as well, because it's doubles and it's under the chaos rank. Okay, so yes, they do come across a ship that potentially will trade with them. So attempt to trade with the merchant ship. We'll just say that they are from Ultima, just to make it different. So Ultima is another merchant city that's a little farther south down the coast from Davennar. And I think they're headed to Heartvale. And because they have a longer journey to make from Ultima, I think they are well stocked on provisions. And so it is possible that they're going to be able to trade for supplies. But first, let's resolve this random event. Let's find our event focus. 75. PC positive. Awesome. All right. And we have 3 PCs. We've got Ben, which will be, I'll roll a D6, and a 1 to 2 will be Ben. 3 to 4 will be Arid, and 5 to 6 will be Orchid. A 3. So this is a PC positive for Arid. Interesting. Okay. What is that PC positive? Action is 53 adversity and 64 for the subject, a burden. Adversity, a burden, or a burden of adversity. And this is positive for Arid. So I think they continue sailing past Velt. And they are continuing down the coastline towards where Davennar is located. And I think when they are maybe a day or so on from Velt. They're starting to look for a place where they can land to forage. And while this is going on, Arid begins to get a strange feeling. He begins to get this very unsettled feeling in his chest. And there is an unusual tang in the air. And he sort of looks around a little bit and I think is a little unsure of what he is sensing. And then there's this pulsing wave of nausea that hits him. And he looks around and Lephalia is nowhere to be seen on deck. And that wave of nausea that he felt definitely originated below deck. And so he is going to stand up from his position on the deck where he was sitting, maybe playing cards with a couple of the other Crest soldiers. And he sort of says, "Deal me out of this hand. I will be right back. I have to go check on something." And he's going to make his way below deck. And he finds, I think, as he draws closer to the hatch that leads below deck, that tang in the air grows stronger and more foul. As he descends down the steps, he is looking around and he reaches out with his talent, seeking out Lephalia's presence. And he feels her back in a corner of this area below deck. He makes his way towards where she is. And I think he finds a curtain that's been propped up and is closing off a section of the ship from view. And he can hear this thrumming, chanting sound coming from within there. As he approaches the curtain, that sense of wrongness grows stronger. And Arid feels this great discomfort. He reaches out a hand and he grabs a hold of the curtain and he draws it aside. And beyond, he sees a small table that's been set up. And Lephalia is standing over the table with her back to him. The claw of Vargosh, the relic that they liberated from that Elfhimic ruin outside of Heartvale, is on the table, and Lephalia seems to be bent over it. Her hands are on either side of the table, and she is standing sort of half bent over as if she's examining it. But Arid can hear this low chanting coming from her mouth. He is cautious as he steps forward. He draws on his talent and he wreathes around himself this aura of protection. An aura of protection like those barriers that he discovered and overcame within the depths of those ruins. And then he says, "Lephalia, can you hear me?" She does not respond, and the chanting continues. Arid takes a breath and takes another step forward and says, "Lieutenant, can you hear me?" Still, she does not respond, and the chanting continues. Finally, Arid reaches out and grabs a hold of her shoulder and pulls and turns her away from the artifact. And as she is turned away from the artifact, he sees that her eyes are completely opaque. Now, he's seen her eyes like this before, but only once, when they were together in Midnight, her home. and she is chanting in a low, guttural voice. And when she's pulled away from the artifact, she lashes out with a burst of magical energy. But Arid protected himself. He prepared himself for this eventuality. And as it washes over him, he raises a hand and speaks a word. It's a word of power, something he has been working on and studying and focusing on for weeks now. And the air cracks as his word reverberates through the air. And whatever hold this thing had on Lephalia is snapped in an instant, in a heartbeat. Her eyes go back to normal, and she stumbles a little bit. Arid catches her and says, "Are you all right? I'm here." Lephalia looks at Arid, and she says, "I'm all right, yes, but I would not have been had you not arrived when you did. You were right, Arid. I should have given up this artifact. My pride has almost been my undoing. There is an ancient power still lingering deep within this claw, and it almost had me. I won't make that same mistake twice. Perhaps together we can overcome this thing." Arid nods and says, "Of course. I will aid you in whatever way I can." And then Lephalia says, "You have grown in power, Arid. I'm impressed. Thank you for freeing me from that thing's grasp. I shudder to think what I could have done had I fallen to it completely." "That would never have happened, Lieutenant. You are far too stubborn." "Perhaps, but you were right. And I should not have treated you the way that I did. These cultists are more dangerous than I originally thought. We have to destroy them, Arid." "I know. And we will. Soon." "Yes. Soon." And then she turns away and throws a covering over the claw of Vargosh. And the whispers that were spilling from it are muted, at least for now. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thank you so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please tell anyone and everyone in your life about it. And if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or buy me a coffee at coffee.com/errantadventures. That's ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, my handle on Instagram and Twitter is @errantsolopod, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post short fiction and campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.